making a video, I hope. Anyway, DraftScience video. Yes, this is the video for the Theory of Everything paper. In progress, the link below. I need a link to a video, just because I want the comments to all come to one video and such. So this will be that video. And, if I answer comments, I will do it in another video and direct comments to this video and keep everything in one place, so to speak, and such. So what part of this do I want to... I'm at the point where you first have to counter-argue the previous established truth before you can even suggest another truth. You have to get you have to get the person in a reasonable frame of mind, cast some doubt on their God, before you can talk about evolution. Because if they're too convinced that it's impossible for anything else to be true, you're not really arguing fair then, are you? You're not arguing from the same foundation of which one makes more sense. It's not a fair fight, so to speak. So I will have to go into a little bit of why Einstein doesn't work, why space-time is not a very sensible way to view the universe. And I don't know whether I should just do that part here. The rest of it is written. I mean, it's sort of just the X thing. You kind of get it. It's two things intersect. You can see it as they go through each other, or you can see it as they bounce off of each other. Either way, the universe has a thing going this way and a thing going that way. But the key thing is that if they bounce off of each other, then you start creating these angles. And 4 angles equals a square. And squares turn into circles. And that's the game, the origin of it. That's simple. And the rest of it is just the dynamics of where are all the fish and where are they going. What causes an imbalance, and what's the range of that field displacement, and that's what everything just becomes. We all become a field displacement, not in space-time, but in a density of chaos. We become order in chaos, and chaos and order don't mix. It's that kind of thing. The square doesn't go in. Squares don't fit in chaos. You can kind of look at, the clean geometry and chaos don't mix. There's a conflict created, so to speak, metaphorically. It's not a real fight. So, the key thing is when you really cut it down to the simplicity of it. I have them marked as 3 items, so I'll just do those really quickly. So you imagine the universe is a clean slate, and you just introduce these simple bits and the simple properties you give. There's incalculably dense field of them, separated by something called distance, but who cares what that is? So little bits move in straight lines, and they're taller than they are fat. So little bits have a frisbee shape coming at you. Frisbee on end, or frisbee this way, but it's coming at you in only 2 dimensions. It's not a 3-dimensional object, which makes it kind of interesting, polarization-wise, in which dimensions it's actually flying in. It can only be in 2 at one time, which is sort of interesting. It can only move in 2 in one time. Well, it can actually only move at 1 in one time, so that's it. It's stuck with 1-dimensional movement. If it's going to go in 2 dimensions, it has to go in 1 dimension, and then go in the other dimension, and go in this dimension, and go. It can't go in all 3 at once. It can't do some sort of math and find the hypotenuse and travel that. So your actual velocity is always much quicker than you think, because you're basically, to go from here to there, you're probably going to go this way, and then a little that way, and then some that way. The bits inside of you are going to be doing a lot more staircasing to get where they're going. So that's a concept I already dealt with, but anyway. But the polarization thing is important for magnetism, but that's not gotten to yet. So in the other third rule is when they hit each other, they exchange direction. So that's just this simple. They come in this way, they go away that way. They exchange direction. The thing going this way goes that way, and the thing going that way goes this way. And whatever angle they do that at, that's what happens. They just exchanged direction, period. Nothing else is exchanged. They leave going just as fast. The same size. Everything else stays the same. And they do nothing else. But the interaction does take a moment of time. So that's sort of the creation of time. You could sort of think about it as it doesn't matter how far apart they are, because they can get from here to their next interaction instantaneously, theoretically. And the only thing that really takes time is the interaction itself, the actual changing of direction. And that's why the speed of light is the speed of light in empty space. It's really the speed of light through gravity, through the field of bits. And you could argue that empty space, what we call empty space, would be the thinnest density of these bits. That they're thicker in matter, and that's why in matter light moves slower, and that they are thinner in space, and therefore light reaches its maximum speed, which is, this is how many collisions per piece of distance I will have, and that establishes the speed of light. And the density is consistent enough where the speed of light is perceived as consistent. Whether that's true at the end of the universe and such, I would argue that it probably isn't. Gravity does probably diminish, and the entire function of the universe breaks down. And you can't hold matter together, so it's all just field, and it's thinning field as it goes further and further out. The field just gets thinner and thinner. The separations get wider and wider, so to speak. The density of the bits gets thinner and thinner, and there's less and less interactions, blah, blah, blah. But that's it. So the entire universe is just those three things. In some way or another, you blame it on one of those three things. Every phenomenon that exists can be traced back to one of those functions. And that's it. It's just a bunch of orbiting bits. I guess I could use the good picture, and you could just the swirly bit picture. Not in that pile. Yeah, but it all ends up being a kind of mathematical geometry. That's balance. There's as much going up as down, as left as right. And then that has a field around it that's also like this, but it's got more chaos in it. And everything has these spins, so to speak. And those spins create movement in the sea around a collective bit of bits. So if all the atoms are spinning, you could kind of get the idea, if they're all spinning in the same direction, that there would be a current around them that would be formed. Current. So that's a word they got pretty right when it comes to electricity. To understand it as a current, as this migration. Where exactly they think the current is, maybe they don't have that part right. How it flows, through the structure. But the flow is basically these bits. Directionality. I'm trying to think of the word for filtered out of chaos. And so you can have things like laser beams and other things where you have a bunch of this stuff that's been separated out into identifiable stuff. Could be argued that there's no way to really create a higher density of it in any substantial way, in any form that's energy. So I could argue that when you see a laser beam, what that really is you've converted a portion of the field energy that existed already into field energy with a specific frequency. So you've given the bits frequency, and that's why they're identifiable as light. But they're still functioning as what they were, which is gravitational bits. It's not new energy, it's just energy converted from gravity to light, photons. From quanta with no frequency is what they're converted from, to quanta with frequency, an established distance between their arrival. And that's really the only distinction. So they've been filtered by going into an electron, let's say, a spinning bit, and that spinning bit is ejected them at a specific point, a specific interval. So they came in different intervals, and they left at a specific interval. And that's what the nature of these spinning objects does, is it takes things from different places and as inputs, and then outputs them in specific ways. So, blame it all on circles. I mean, it's the nature of this conservation circle. The circle is the battery. It's the converter. It takes the chaos energy and converts it into a balanced amounts. This much up, this much down, this much left, this much right. And that's the nature of the material function. It's all storage. It's all taking bits of the field, pieces of its density, so to speak, pieces of it, and just changing its orientation, its relationship. So it's not making more stuff. It's just taking the stuff that exists, and instead of it flying all over the place, it flies in circles. And that's the conservation. And it has the implication of creating this expandable thing, where you take a little circle in the atom and theoretically end up with a big circle like a sun or a galaxy. All the same mechanism, essentially. Built out of the same, it breeds itself, so to speak. Once it's initiated, it's a kind of induction. Matter is a kind of induction. It will induce itself. It will induce once you create one, it'll keep growing, kind of a thing, in a way. Conceptually. It won't grow it. You can't make individual atoms an unlimited size, but the idea is that the atoms will stick to each other. They'll grow. Then those collectives of atoms will also be things that will grow. They can stick to each other. They'll stick in clumps, and it just depends on how far down you go. But there's the origin clump, the quanta, that the whole thing's made out of. And everything else is a manifestation of it. So again, I won't go into magnetism in depth, but magnetism is just this same energy polarized. So the same shadow effect you get with gravity. Gravity shadows two objects. There's a constant, if I put one object in the field, there's a constant pressure from all sides. So it doesn't go anywhere unless it has some imbalance inside. But if it's perfectly balanced, it'll just stay there and get jostled about. But if I put another object next to it, you can sort of understand that if this object absorbs the pressure coming this way, and this object absorbs the pressure coming this way, that there won't be any pressure in here, and the two things will be pushed into that vacancy. And that's, gravity. Magnetism works exactly the same way. It's the same exact force. It's gravity. It's just that it's been now polarized. So now the magnet has two sides. Those two sides convert exactly opposite. One converts into straight liners. One converts into horizontal liners. And the two sides are affected twice as much by the opposite polarization to what they produce, and they're not affected at all by the polarization they produce. So they invert the strength of the gravity, essentially multiply it by polarizing all of it. So yeah, so that's why it's a stronger force, is that it's been tuned and through polarization to a invisible and double visible, twice as heavy, no weight at all. And in doing that, you can magnify something, make it a great deal stronger as a force, even though it's the same amount of energy. It's now creating what the chaos field doesn't like, which is order, polarization. Yeah, alright, so I think I'll just get to the Einstein part now. I think that's enough of the foundation. The expectation is that you don't comment on this video without reading the document, and it's in progress, so it's not that much to read, actually. There are a couple pages, and so yeah, so it is disappointing. I mean, there's these other cranks out there, who have theories, and clearly part of the premise of their theory is the current explanation is wrong, and yet these people, as a collective, can't do anything constructive to force the established science to deal with the fact that it has flaws and inadequacies. And instead, we're so distracted in terms of pushing our own counter theory, that we can't do anything collectively constructive in terms of getting at the emperor's not wearing any clothes. All the cranks are naked too. That's sort of the problem. So, yeah, it's not. it's disappointing that we can't make anything out of that collective incentive to cast some doubt that the job of physics is done, and that they've explained this well or thoroughly enough, and they haven't, and that their evidence is overwhelming, which it is not. And so I guess I'll get to a couple of those points, because I haven't written them yet, so I'd like to talk about them. Clearly the cornerstone of Einstein is the space-time idea. And if you look at it just plainly, I mean, it's difficult to conceive. It doesn't do 3 dimensions. So that could be your first argument against Einstein's space-time as an explanation, is that whenever it's drawn in 2 dimensions with a recess, a dimple in some sort of fabric in 2 dimensions. Kind of impossible to make that make sense in 3 dimensions, because then the dimple has to be something inside the planet, and where is it going? Where's this space that's converging going? You can't see it as a dimple anymore. You can't see it as just a recession in 3 dimensions, because it all has to somehow be pulled into that center. And what would be the force doing that, and where's all that space and time going? Where's the output? Energy in, where's the energy out? So on its face, it's kind of sloppy for that reason. More importantly, the model relies on the very function of gravity, so it's supposed to be explaining the origin of the force, and yet it's using the force it's supposed to be explaining as an integral part of the model's function. The model doesn't function without the installation of the force that you're supposed to be explaining. Unless you create trajectories that are not round. You start creating, some kind of narrowing vortex, some rail that the thing rails down into is forced down by some other force, not gravity. But then you're just saying, well, I just made up a tornado. I just said, okay, I'll just make up something to explain it, and it's just a completely engineered explanation. And again, take that tornado into 3 dimensions, and you're really going to have a problem explaining how that works, because it doesn't. Right, my biggest problem is sort of this problem, is the fact that what space-time is being used to do is to explain the energy of gravity and the energy of perhaps magnetism or electricity or any of these forces, we call them, fields or forces. And instead of accounting for where the energy comes from, they create this fake dimension, space-time, and allow it to create and destroy energy, which you're not supposed to be allowed to do. So it's just a horrible cheat. It's just creating a rug to sweep the extra bits under, and then when you need an extra bit, you can just pull it out from under the rug. And it's just that simple a contrivance, a gimmick. It doesn't explain the energy. It doesn't explain the movement. It doesn't explain how it does it. It certainly doesn't explain velocity and inertia, how things maintain their going somewhere if they don't have this. How are they bending the space in front of them with no force, applying no energy? The magical space-time just complies and provides them a hill to slide down. No. So getting to the root of the evidence for this, you have time dilation. Well, that can be explained as metabolism dilation. The metabolism of your atoms slow down as you acquire velocity. The velocity is a real thing inside of you, essentially, whatever speed you're going, and your speed is essentially replacing your atomic function. So the orbits slow down because they have to spend some portion of their time moving in a direction. And I think you can understand that. If you have a school of fish and they're all swimming in all kinds of directions, and then I oblige the school to move, you'll notice that the fish, if all of them are going to be going with the school, and that all of them are going to have to swim in circles less regularly to be able to go in a direction, because now they're going to be doing this instead of a circle, and that will take time. And so the metabolism of the school of fish, the speed at which they circle each other, will slow down. And you can certainly understand that when they're going really fast in a direction, that they're not spending any time going in circles anymore. Clearly a complete enough explanation. No need to play with time or space. So I guess the other point I wanted to make about that, space-time, I should have gotten to before I got to this example, I suppose, is the very idea of calling these dimensions, space and time, to think of them as dimensions, as things as real as up, down, left, right, forward, back. Space and time are functions in up, down, left, right, forward, back. They're things that happen in those dimensions. Distance and the time interactions, those are things that happen in the dimensions. They're functions. They're not separate dimensional places. So it's not even conceptually correct to apply these words to things that don't have a space. I mean, to deny the three dimensions their space, essentially, you're saying space can't be both a function in the current dimensions and a separate dimension. That's cheating. It's like saying that up has some separate dimension somewhere where it's doing up in some other way. And there's in the fifth dimension. It's not. There's one up, and there's distance in up, and there's time in up. And that's it. They're functions. They're not dimensions. So it's a violation of a conceptual rule here. I think it can be understood that these three dimensions are really solid. They make essentially a circle when you understand them. The X, Y, and Z axes. If you connect the dots of their external points, you'll make a circle essentially. A sphere. And that has a continuity to it. You can't apply any other, you can't glue anything to that circle and say, no, the circle really is supposed to have this tumor of space and time stuck on it. No, that idea is complete enough. It defines conservation perfectly. What goes up goes down, kind of thing, the same amounts, and that balance is just so obvious. It's complete. It doesn't lack anything. It doesn't need space-time to mess it up. All right. All right. So the proof of time dilation is unnecessary. That's explained merely as a function of velocity. That velocity will slow down any clock's function. It'll slow down any human's function. It'll slow down any material thing's function. And clearly, I would argue that speeds approaching half the speed of light or some kind of preposterously fast speed, that matter will blow up essentially. It won't be able to do it because the stuff coming at it, the frequency of everything coming at it will be much higher. You can't change how fast light hits you, but you can change the frequency of the light hitting you, because the light is these quantons with a frequency. They're bits, and you'll have more bit interaction per moment of time as you start accelerating something. And so visible light will become X-rays. You're just going to be annihilated by the fact that energy will manifest in forms that are not compatible with matter. And we know those energies exist. You know you're not going to survive constant X-ray exposure. And again, it has to do with this idea too, is the faster you're going, the weaker your matter's getting. The bonds that are holding your atoms together, the bonds holding the protons and the neutrons and the electrons together, it's all breaking down because the orbits are slowing down. And the probability of it maintaining itself is degrading. And it's probably expanding some because it's losing the pressure that holds it together in the field. And it's then that's why it's annihilated by little tiny things. A little tiny thing is just minding its own business, sitting there in space. My finger, I could put my finger in space, and if I crash a satellite into it at 30 miles an hour, 30,000 miles a second or something, the satellite will be annihilated by my finger. Not because my finger is strong, but because the matter in the thing moving is weak. So it's a whole new perspective on what it means to be in motion. So anyway, that's enough of that one. So that gets, you don't need space-time to explain time dilation. Its explanation of gravity is, as I'm arguing, kind of vacant. And then all you other have for as a proof is this idea of lensing, this idea that light is bent by gravity. This was the big proof that established Einstein as a genius. It established that he did voodoo. He predicted the future, so to speak, and therefore everybody had to say, well, he's the real psychic. He did it. He predicted the stock market crash, so to speak. And so therefore, he's right about everything. And I would argue that that hasn't been verified, and that we have a Hubble telescope now that can do everything. It can do lensing experiments every single day, unlike ground telescopes that couldn't because of all the atmospheric light. It can't look at the sun, and certainly can't look at the edge of the sun and see anything, because there's too much noise. And so the Hubble telescope, though, can, because there's no atmospheric noise, and so it can just put a little round thing on the lens and block the sun out. It can see the edge of the sun. It can see the gravitational field around the sun, and it can see the stars behind it. So why don't we have tons of evidence of lensing by our sun? If our sun was capable of lensing images, we should have a ton of images now of stars and galaxies and all kinds of stuff seen through the lens of the sun. And I don't see any evidence of that. If somebody has links to evidence of that, I'd like to see it, where our sun is used as a lens by the Hubble telescope. or all these other telescopes. I mean, they have a ton of telescopes up there now. Where are the images? Where's the modern technology showing us Einstein's original lensing? Do the same planet, do the same experiment. You can do it once a year. You can do it every single year. You don't need the moon to create an eclipse anymore. So why don't they do it? Prove it. And again, even if they were able to create what they're calling lensing, I think rationally you could understand that it's really just diffraction in the very big atmosphere of the sun. Just as our atmosphere diffracts light, creates scattering, the very scattering that disables our telescopes during the day, the sun's atmosphere is huge, even though it's not a technical atmosphere. It clearly produces a huge corona, a huge area around it where it shoots a tremendous number of particles, atomic and otherwise, into space around it, and then the gravity of the sun pulls those things all back down again. So they go out hundreds of miles, thousands of miles, maybe millions of miles, and are slowly pulled back in. And so it's a very thick cloud the sun produces, and it's not insane to expect that cloud to create some light diffraction. All right, but again, I don't think the fact that the experiment hasn't been routinely done, and the fact that the lensing that they have from the rest of the universe is now all dependent on them creating things like dark matter to create enough gravity to justify what they're calling lensing, I think kind of is a giveaway that lensing is not a viable concept. You really can't bend light with gravity. And light is quanta. It's like saying you could bend gravity with gravity. The quanta can't be affected by the quanta, except in that way where they interact with each other in their straight geometry, their kinetic interactions. So the theory would be, if I had a photon of light going through this field of kinetic stuff, that even if there was an imbalance in the field, even if the flow of the field was across where the light was traveling, the exchanges are always the same universe ends up being the universe, right? The exchange can't change the frequency. So the pattern of the frequency would always go on the straight line. It just can't. What photon is carrying it would change. So the photons would keep changing identity, the ones carrying the frequency. But their location would still be the same because they can't. The frequency is always going to take that straight line path. So even though they keep going knocked this way, they keep getting knocked in one direction, it really doesn't matter. They were getting knocked in this direction or that direction or that direction. And so in the chaos of space, they're getting knocked in all kinds of directions all the time. And yet none of that knocking bends them in any way or deflects them or ruins their trajectory by chaos alone. So it seems clear that light's very durable. It travels billions of miles across space through gazillions and gazillions of these little interactions with the gravitons, and yet the frequency remains intact. So I don't think a theory of gravity being able to affect it would make any sense. All right, I'm probably almost out of time, so there's probably enough to make my point. So my point is that Einstein's creation of space-time was really just an engineered solution. They needed something to explain the convergence, and so he explained it, but he explained it with a cheat, with a made-up dimensional space where he could create energy. And the point is the energy's always been there. It's in the ether, so to speak. The ether isn't dead. The ether is an active field of, I hate to use the word random, but randomly scattered bits of energy, and that random scattering creates a constant pressure affecting every location in the field. At every location in the field, there's stuff heading right for you. It's inevitably going to hit you, and it's all coming from what seems an even sphere around you. And that's the nature of gravity. That field creates it, and that's why planets are spheres. And yeah, it explains it all. So anyway, I think that's enough of a video. So I will answer questions either in text or in videos, but one way or the other, and relevant links and whatnot, but they really should be relevant. Yeah. So, till next time and such.